Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of KSP Revival. Last episode we began exploring the newly added Yunxiao star system added by Cosmic Serenity 3.0. We explored two planets so far, that being Jinza, a really hot melting magma world with lots of uranium, and Hundung, a habitable primordial planet with a bunch of dinosaurs on it. Today we'll be exploring the moons of Hundung and some other moons of some other gas giants. First, we'll be exploring Qiongqi, which is a shepherd moon that's somewhat pancake-shaped, similar to Bikos from Celestial Harmony. You'll probably know what I'm talking about if you've seen KSP Resurgence. Now, something very interesting about Cosmic Serenity is that it actually has volumetric rings, so if you're actually far away from the rings, you can actually see little particles of dust, and if you fly through them, you'll see a bunch of little rocks. It's a really great addition to the entire planet pack, which makes it a lot better in terms of visually. Now, being a very small shepherd moon, similar to Gilly, it has almost no gravity and requires almost no delta V to land on it and move around. It's also very elongated, so I'll be landing on both the equator and the North Pole. Another challenge with low gravity is that landing legs keep sending you back into space, because the springs on the landing legs, they're just enough to send you a little bit above the ground, so it's a little annoying. You gotta use your RCS to make sure you stay stuck to the ground. Now, I do have a maxed out tech tree in this entire save, so collecting signs isn't necessary, but I will be continuing to collect science experiments, because I didn't actually complete the tech tree legitimately. I just force completed it when I started this brand new series, because I wanted to transition the save file from Resurgence's science mode playthrough to more of a sandbox playthrough, because I don't want to have to grind a bunch of science labs just to unlock all the warp drives and other things. I just feel like it'd be a little annoying. Of course, we have to do the arbitrary flag placing. And don't mind that we're using the wrong flag. I recycled this lander from my Project Nebulon cinematic. Very great lander, though. I don't like how it doesn't have enough reaction wheels, so it doesn't turn around that fast, which for a lander is actually not a very good thing to have, because it really makes the landing a lot harder, especially when you goof up and go a little sideways. Now we'll be landing on the North Pole. I took a really weird trajectory to get here because it's very low gravity here on Qiongqi. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. So I can just burn a whole lot of fuel and be able to get anywhere I want really quickly in this little moon. Now, the eagle-eyed among you may notice that the biome from Kerbal Engineer Redux says I'm in the South Pole, even though I'm very obviously on the North Pole. I really think this might be a glitch where the biome map is upside down, though I could be wrong. Maybe this is a intentional design choice. But I still think it is potentially a glitch. Now, since the other moon of Hundung is a vacuum planet, I'm not even going to bother rendezvousing with the Nebulon just yet. Instead, I'll go directly to the next moon, which is called Taowu, which somewhat resembles what our moon would have looked like a couple billion years ago. It has a very thin, hazy atmosphere. In fact, the atmosphere is so thin, it's almost as if it doesn't even have one. Which is why in Kerbal Space Program it actually doesn't have an atmosphere. It just has some scatterer configs to simulate the haze. It also has a good amount of a bunch of lava on it. It all seems to be concentrated in one area, suggesting there might have been an impact there a while ago. But I'm not actually sure if there was an impact. I'm just using my brain to see what might have happened. It's a bit of intuition. And since this is a vacuum planet, I can get as close as I want to. I do have to make sure my trajectory is coming at the right direction, because I would rather not have a retrograde orbit. I mean, I do have plenty of delta V in this, so having a bit more surface velocity wouldn't really hurt. I'd rather do things as efficiently as possible. Now, I want to land right in the crater where it's the most interesting. Of course, I gotta do it in the daytime, so I do have to time warp a little bit. Yeah, landing right next to lava is going to be a little bit tricky because you're going to have to land on land where you're not going to explode because of overheating. And you have to not land in the lava. I didn't want to land too close to the lava, I just wanted to land in the central crater, just because it was the most interesting spot. This has a bit more gravity, so it's a lot easier to actually land. And actually stay landed. You can still use the EVA jetpack comfortably though. Even if the gravity was too high, I could still just use the ladders, because this lander is designed for very high gravity environments, which is why it has a whole lot of TWR, and a couple of airlocks very close to the ground with the ladders, so I don't have to walk the Kerbals out on a very long ladder down to the ground. Instead, they can just use an integrated tunnel within the core of the lander and just walk down that. Or just teleport from the command pod to the airlock, because that's how Kerbal Space Program works. Another thing worth mentioning is that a whole lot of the Kerbals in this mission are actually from my Kerbal Applications forum, which is in the description of this video. So if you want to have your very own Kerbal on any of these missions in the future, then you should consider filling it out. Because almost all the Kerbals that end up on that forum actually end up in one of my videos. I'm not even going to bother getting to an orbit, I'm just going to transfer directly to Nebulon. And I can just cut out all the weird docking fluff and just skip to the final approach and docking. Yeah, originally I was actually going to go to Shang, which is the next planet out in the Yunxiao system, but I'm actually rather low on fuel on the Nebulon right now. However, I do have some exoscoops on the Nebulon, so I can actually find a gas giant and absorb some of the hydrogen from its exosphere. So that's what I ended up doing. Now, a good tip when using warp drives with Blue Shift is that you have to warp pretty close to the body you're actually trying to get into an orbit around. But right before you actually enter its sphere of influence, you want to actually cancel out all your relative velocity, or at least most of it, and then actually get into an orbit around it from there. Now, my relative velocity with Shang was actually very high, but my relative velocity with Qi, which is another gas giant in the Yunxiao system, is actually a lot lower. And since it is a gas giant, I believe it's actually the second one in the system, I can actually scoop its exosphere for fuel. I did this back with ISV Excalibur all the way back in KSP Resurgence, where I put a bunch of exo scoops on it so I can actually refuel it as long as it's a gas giant. So with these exo scoops, the one from Impulse Party, I believe, you basically have unlimited Delta V. I do a quick flyby of Yang. I don't actually mean to do that. I just happened to get an encounter with it, which we will be exploring later this episode. Now, to use exoscoops effectively, you want to get as close to the gas giant or whatever other body you're orbiting as possible. So we can get a nice view of all the clouds. One really neat thing about Qi is that it actually changes color based on the seasons. So I believe in the winter it's a very deep blue color, while in the summer it's more of a tealish color with purple poles. It's really unique and cool. I like how far our Kerbal Space Program graphics mods have come. Now, I cut out most of the exoscooping part because it's just a lot of time warping, a lot of flashing lights, and I don't want to have that in my videos. Now, it may not seem like it in the actual video, but Nebulon is a super laggy vessel. I believe it's caused by Blue Shift making a bunch of excess calculations and just lagging out my game, because if I were to make a similar vessel with no warp drives, it would actually perform a lot better. In fact, I believe Nebulon, despite having way fewer parts, is a lot laggier than Excalibur. And Excalibur, the reason why it was so laggy is because I think I went a little bit too crazy with the radiators. And that just boosted my part count on that vessel by a ridiculous amount. Now, the first moon of Qi is called Yin. It's a vacuum world. It's actually on the smaller side. But one thing that's really interesting about it is it has a massive crater with a bunch of fog coming out of it. And I believe that fog is generated by a bunch of lava and other materials emanating from the moon's mantle. And I had to keep time warping because I just couldn't get this on the daytime side. seems that it's tightly locked towards Qi. So getting an actual encounter where it's on the daytime side is very difficult. Get some nice screenshots. I'm not sure what's causing this weird iridescent effect of the fog. I'm not sure if it's intentional or if it's just a bug, but I think it actually looks very, very cool. So, intentional or not, I think this should stay in the Cosmic Serenity Planet Pack. Yeah, remember when I was talking about how unstable the K-list lander was? Well, this is where the issue really rears its ugly head. Because it doesn't have enough reaction wheels to actually turn around effectively, so it turns around very slowly, even with RCS. So it just keeps flipping over, and it's just very unfun to land. I had this exact same issue with Yunxiao, which is actually the first planet in the Yunxiao system. Eventually, we actually land safe and sound. One thing I like about Ying is the fog that emanates from the craters and lava cracks. And just so happens that the sun actually set right when we went EVA. After time warping to when it was day again, I decided to collect a little bit more science and actually get the Kerbals out on EVA to plant the flag. I usually don't fill up the landers all the way because just having more Kerbals doesn't really give me any reward. It's just more Kerbals to get on EVA and more time I have to spend getting a bunch of Kerbals out just for 2 seconds to do a single photo op. Now the description of Ying actually says it has localized atmospheres, but I look in the description of the planet and there's actually no atmosphere to speak of. So maybe it's just a headcanon thing where it has very thin atmospheres in these little pockets of haze. Or maybe it's actually configured to have very thin atmospheres in these spots. I'm actually going to get a Kerbal out and see what lies within the haze. And of course, it's a big lava lake. Thankfully, I'm actually landing it, and nobody actually dies. But we do get a nice view of the lava lake. It's kind of weird using the EVA jetpack in almost atmospheric haze like that. It just looks a little weird. Because you're not used to using the EVA jetpack within an atmosphere. And before I go, there's another spot I want to check out on foot, or more like on EVA jetpack. It's because there's actually some lichens or something growing on this moon, according to the in-game description. I'm not sure if this weird orange stuff is a lichen that the game is talking about, but I think that's what the game was talking about. Just a little look at it, and then it's time to get on with the mission. Because if you do like lichens, the next moon, Ying, has plenty of that. In fact, it's filled with algae, as far as the eye can see. Unless you're not by the water, then there's no algae to speak of. Now, surprisingly, Ying, this other moon, is actually very comfortable. I actually landed on it. It has a nice temperature of around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not really sure why Ying is so comfortable despite being this far from Yunxiao, because Yunxiao from this distance looks like a tiny little orange speck. I believe it has something to do with the atmospheric composition, which I'll get to more on later. Now, since Ying is an atmospheric moon, with quite a thick one at that, I will be using the Helium X because it's much better suited for an atmosphere. Although the K-list lander could work in an atmosphere, because the engines do work well in either vacuum or atmosphere. It's just a Helium X, it's the one that has wings, the one that can actually maneuver in it. It also has VTOL capabilities. So it's just the better engine for the job. Now, I couldn't get the encounter on this one right, because I just kept fat-fingering the time warp for some reason. So I just decided to cut all the fluff out and just skip to the mid-course correction that got me on a excellent trajectory. Not enough waiting around, it's time to actually land on Yang and explore it. Now, I believe the reason why Yang's atmosphere is so warm, despite being this far away from Yunxiao, is because I feel like it has a whole lot of greenhouse gases, specifically carbon dioxide, to the point where there's actually barely any oxygen in the atmosphere, so you can't actually remove your helmet and breathe, and air-breathing engines just won't work. However, there is algae on it, so it's semi-habitable. And the firefly effects can actually see, just telling by the color, there actually is a lot of carbon dioxide, because there's actually this really helpful chart on the Firefly wiki on GitHub that shows what elements burn what color when they're plasma. And based on the colors of carbon and oxygen, I feel like this atmosphere is predominantly carbon dioxide. It is a little on the thicker side despite being a little bit lighter in terms of gravity than carbon. So maybe it is similar to Eve in some ways, the stock system. I decided to land on this really lush area because I want to land where the algae is. Don't worry, I'll explore the volcanic wasteland later in this episode. Because another thing about Yang is that it has a massive volcano that periodically erupts and covers the entire planet in ash. So instead of looking like a really lush planet similar to Kerbal, it actually starts looking more like Venus when it erupts. Now, to slow down the Helium X in VTOL mode, I typically just fly around in circles to bleed off as much speed as I possibly can. It also seemed that I decided to land in the middle of a thunderstorm despite there being almost no rain clouds to speak of. We did land right by a rock, but thankfully I have parallax collisions disabled, so we won't obliterate our landing gear just by looking at the ground the wrong way. Like I previously said, the atmosphere is unbreathable, so I can't actually remove the helmets. I believe it's predominantly carbon dioxide. I actually did look into the description of this thing. I couldn't find anything about it, but my guess is that it's mostly carbon dioxide, considering the firefly effects look like it's carbon dioxide. This time we're actually using the right flag, because I am using the Helium X, which is a brand new vessel that I just sent up to start this mission. If I did use it previously in Project Nebulon, I actually recovered that vessel instead of just having it stay in orbit with the Nebulon. Now, unfortunately, this planet doesn't have any dinosaurs to speak of, but it does have a massive volcano, so let's go explore that. I did time warp to nighttime, and there's actually a bunch of rainbows here, similar to irises in the Hades system of Cosmic Serenity, which is the eyeball planet that orbits the pink dwarf star. So I did time warp a little bit to find where the volcano was, and right when I stopped time warping, the volcano decided to go ahead and erupt. And also it's nighttime. You can actually see from the map view that the entire planet's starting to get covered in ash. And there's a massive ash layer that's starting to form way above the cloud layer, thanks to volumetric clouds. Actually, I had to do a really weird turnaround because I realized I was actually going the wrong way. It would have been a lot faster to fly over the North Pole, similarly to what I did with Hoondung when I was hunting for all the dinosaurs. If you actually fly through the ash layers, you can actually fly through a whole bunch of ash clouds and little particles. And do you see that massive black billowing tower? That's where the active volcano is. And we're going to be landing right next to it. Is this the safest thing to do? Definitely not. In fact, the ash particles could actually cause severe damage to the structural integrity of the Helium X. But this is Kerbal's space program. Physics and reality and common sense take a back seat in this game. Now you do have to be careful when actually landing this, because I often blow this up when I land it. Thankfully, despite a slightly bumpy and worrying landing, I can actually survive and walk away from it, and still hope that I'll be able to return to orbit, because nothing broke. Now that we've explored the volcano, it's time to actually return to orbit, but first I want to make sure I'm on an equatorial area so it can return to an equatorial orbit without having to do a bunch of weird inclination changes. In fact, I almost basically go to space just by doing this. It's really cool how the ash cloud is basically right on the edge of space. From a low orbit, it's almost as if you can reach your hand and touch it. The other thing that Cosmic Serenity has done for the first time in Kerbal Space Program is that it actually added rainbows for the first time. Although the rainbows are definitely not a new feature now in the 3.0 update, as they were actually featured in the very first version of this mod. Still a beautiful feature that just goes to show how far the planet-making community has come. Not really sure how the air-breathing engines are surviving and healing all the ash particles, but I guess it's best not to think about it. Now, despite fat-fingering the time warp and having to do a really weird maneuver to save the Helium X, I do end up reaching orbit and docking with a nebulon. Now, unfortunately, that will be the end of this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you all later.